Welcome, everyone. This is our conversation on liminal space as a gift. And I am just thrilled to be able to speak this morning or the afternoon, wherever you are, with Jean Bolen and Nina Simons. These two women have been influential in my life for many years. They are writers, they are leaders, they are creators, they are movement builders. And their inspiring presence is a kind of presence we need in our world right now. Hopefully, when we finish this conversation, we will all be inspired presences in the world. Jean has a bowl that creates a unifying sound that I want to say is magical. It's really not, but it does something very wonderful. So I'm going to ask her to tell us about the bowl and then to create the sound for us.
I will be sounding my Tibetan bowl, and it's a vibration that I feel goes through the heart chakra of everyone who hears it at the same time. So that what it does is it puts us all in a circle. Wherever you are part of this circle, connected at the heart level through the sound. And that has a quality of me feeling, for example, that when I speak, I am speaking to all of you. I'm not just looking at little squares. And it transforms this mode of communication into a deeper, more connected way than just technology. So when you hear this vibration sound, feel it in your heart, go silent and join in this magic circle.
I hope you have all felt it resonating someplace in your body. I feel it right here. So welcome to this new sound space and this unified energetic space. We're going to talk about what liminal means. What does liminal mean to you, Jean, to you, Nina? And how are you connecting to it? So with that, you don't need me. Begin your conversation.
Well, liminal is one of my favorite words now because it really applies to where we are. Liminal comes from a Latin word that means threshold, and it means the once we entered the pandemic, we entered a liminal space. We can't go back to what was. And until we get through this, we are in this in-between space between what was and what could be or what will be. And what we do in this liminal space, individually and collectively, for ourselves, for the planet, we are in transition, and each individual person makes a difference where he or she is. And so if you think of yourself as being in a liminal time, a time of transition, where it's possible to make changes in your life and in yourself. For many people, the sheltering in place of being at home is a time where they can tune out or tune in to what's really important. Often people just start to numb out. But then there is everybody else who has the opportunity, for example, of dreaming more and remembering them more than ever before. Since I'm a Jungian analyst and I listen to dreams and I'm doing my work virtually, I'm really getting how people are dreaming deeply. And then if you dream and you in that waking, just as you wake up from the dream, you don't just hop out of bed, but you actually go over the dream and then you get up, jot down a few notes, and then you'll be able to think about it during the day, and it'll be much more interesting than turning on the TV. So that is one of the thoughts about liminal. Liminal is to me the way synchronicity was for me in the late 70s, quite a long time ago, when I wanted to put synchronicity in the title of a book. And I was told it's too esoteric a word. And then Sting came out with a platinum record named Synchronicity, and it suddenly became more known as a word. Well, this is how liminal is for me. I titled a work in progress or process as liminal, and it just seems to not go anywhere because it seemed to be an unknown word. But the more I live with this word, and the more I talk about it, the more it fits. We are in a liminal time and space. And what we do here makes all the difference on the soul journey that is ours. So I think I could go on, obviously, but I think I'll stop.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I think what I would add is that for me, liminal means entering into the inner world and the invisible world. I first became really acquainted with liminal space after my father died very suddenly. And for months afterwards, while I was in a great deal of grief and loss, and I felt utterly heartbroken, I also had this experience of life having like an extra dimension. It was sort of crystalline and so magical and beautiful to me. And so I associate the liminal with when death draws near. And I also am, because I tend to see the world through gender-colored lenses, and as Jean knows so well, Carl Jung associated the feminine with inner, the masculine with outer, and we're all products of a culture that has emphasized the outer and the activity and behavior and busyness. And so we all come to this time with a bit of a bias, whether we've consciously chosen it or not, just because of being a product of this culture. And so for me, this liminal time at the confluence of several crises at once gives us an opportunity to turn our attention inward in a way that life doesn't often do. And I notice, because I think both Jean and I, and probably many of you, are also really attuned to the natural world. Here we are in winter, where nature's instructions are to rest and go inside in the winter time. But how many of us actually do that in our regular lives? So, you know, I love this topic, and I also could go on, but for me, this pandemic time has been a time to really explore the invisible world. I also lost my mother about 1.5 years ago to this life. And so I've been exploring what my connection is with her now that she's not here in her body. And my dreams have become much more vivid to me, and I've started a meditation practice and all kinds of things that I might never have done otherwise. So it feels like a very, very rich field for us to explore. And I'm so grateful to be here with all of you and with the two of you. Thank you for calling us together.
Well, you know, the pandemic is a liminal time for sure. And I think it's something like 450,000 Americans have died since this began, and something like 260 million people have come down with COVID and survived it.
Yeah.
So death has been in this liminal space for sure. And I'm also reminded of why a book I wrote called Close to the Bone, Life-Threatening Illness as a Soul Journey, why it is the only book of mine that I've revised. And it had to do with my son Andy's death and how he was heard from after. You see, before it was the whole descent of where you are, you have a life-threatening illness, and I was drawing on mythology and stories about how people were able to go into long time remissions and lots of different things. They used that experience to make major changes in their lives.
Yeah.
Well, my son Andy fell and was paralyzed and was in my what I call the library of my house, and I was sleeping on the sofa and he was in a hospital bed. And because he was paralyzed, I couldn't. He would whisper loudly to wake me up if he needed anything. And you know, if you've ever been a mom, you can hear your own kid in a crowd. Well, it still works when you have a kid who's 29 and who whispers loudly. And of course, I woke up. Well, there was one night he called, and I just was startled because it was his old voice. I hadn't heard his voice for a while. His old voice woke me up. And so my first reaction was, how could he do this? And then I went over to the bedside, assuming that, as usual, he would be looking at me and he would be telling me what he needed. But this time it was different. He was breathing and his eyes were closed. He took a couple of breaths as I rheostated up the light, and he took his last breath and he left. Basically, he did not want me to wake up in the morning and find him in bed, dead. He woke me up so that I was at that moment when he passed. And then what happened is so many people heard from him, because in that period before he died, he was actually in a very serene state, not bitter, not and when I'd ask him or write to him, because he lost his hearing too. You know, what are you doing? And he would say, then he would tell me that he was thinking about all the trips he's ever taken. Basically, he was doing a life review.
Wow. Yeah.
And reliving it. And so when he left, he had done all this liminal work between being here and being next. Yeah. And my father's death also showed me something, that he I had taken a leave from my residency in psychiatry. Went down to stay with my parents as my father came home essentially to die after a long cancer process and treatment and whatever. And the around the clock nurse would wake. We had a signal to wake us up if something came up. Well, that happened, and my father was obviously on his way out, and I was at his bedside, and he looked like, well, anyway, he suddenly opened his eyes wide, and he was looking off to where, at something I couldn't see, but suddenly his face was just infused with joy. He saw something, and then he was gone in that direction, and that was such a testimony to me about what might come next, that what was coming next for him made him look like he was glowing. And given that his body looked like the old, I mean, he had his jaw removed because the cancer had begun in the inside of his mouth. So you can imagine how he would look if he removed a jaw and had lost weight and was, he did not look like himself. His body was not him. It was his like discarded old clothes. Actually, that it would felt like it. Spirit left. One nanosecond he was in it. The next nanosecond he was gone, and he was off to somewhere that he was obviously looking forward to. So that kind of last experience that you remind me of, Nina, and otherwise I wouldn't have talked about it. Is that place where you cross over. And then getting back to Andy, because he had done so much work, and because his father had started Psychic Magazine and himself was a psychic himself, I felt Andy's presence, and I also continue to feel his presence. But I'm an intuitive feeling type. I'm not a sensate type who sees visions and hears things. Well, he started to talk to his father, who heard him and jotted down notes.
Wow.
And one of the things he said is, there are lots of people here and there are lots of helpers. So he was describing sort of the next stage and in between. Anyway, there is someplace next. There is something liminal. There is also that sense of presence of spirits on the other side. And some general rule, I understand, that they can't interfere, but they can help if we ask.
Exactly. Well, and the other thing that I'm reminded of by you, Jean, is that only yesterday I was in a call with some people I'm quite close to, and I found myself saying that I felt as if I'm betwixt and between, which of course is another description for liminal. And what I've been noticing in myself is that there is so much uncertainty right now out in the world and even within myself, of knowing that I am being changed in this experience and that I am changing, but not knowing exactly what I'm going to look like at the other end. Right? And if we live in a conscious universe, as I believe we do, and we are called at this time to actually transform everything about our culture and our civilization and our ways of living and our understanding of what it means to be human, then it makes sense that each of us are going through an inner transformation at the same time. And what I notice is that that transformation can be exhausting, right? I mean, it's exciting, and there is evidence that appears of newness that's super energizing and invigorating. And it also requires energy to be with the not knowing. And it's not something we necessarily have a lot of practice at. But I feel as though part of my practice in this liminal time is to relax into the uncertainty, to be able to surrender and to trust that, this transformation we're all going through as a species and as a planet has a reason, and that we have what we need to meet it. But also to be okay with, there's some of who I am that I know at this time, and some that's mysterious and that feels like, that dissolving moment when the caterpillar becomes the butterfly and is mush in between. It's a little like that, right?
Yeah, because there is the inner transformation process. It's like in the birth canal. We've all gone through a major transformation from being a fetus inside our mother to going through the birth canal and getting out. And the danger to the fetus is at the very end, when you go under the pubic bone of your mother. that is when you enter the world, but it's also where the danger is the greatest. This is where if if you if it's possible to have a cesarean section, you might be rescued. But if you're somewhere in the world where that doesn't happen, the potential of the death of the fetus and the death of the mother is there. It's a real danger in that transition zone between being inside your biological maternal mother and being out and taking your first breath. And I love delivering babies during my rotating internship. I volunteered for extra rotations because it was such a liminal, messy miracle to catch a baby as it came out into the world. And then I've been thinking recently about how once we come into the world, we are in the womb of the Mother Earth who breathes us, but it comes through the trees, really. The placenta, once we're out in the atmosphere, it's the trees that take in our carbon dioxide, like the placenta does, and takes it away and brings in the oxygen that we breathe. And so the sense of the trees as being like the placenta for human beings and anybody else who needs oxygen. And and then we have people, I remember when Ronald Reagan said, "You've seen one tree, you see them all." And the seeing ancient trees and cutting them down and thinking it's Kleenex and lumber, when actually it is what gives us the oxygen to be here. So there's something about what I've been called to do is it's a timing thing, I guess. I wrote a book called Like a Tree, How Trees, Women, and Tree People Can Save the Planet a decade ago. And I wrote it because I lost a beautiful tree in front of my house. Right. Because it was part of a homeowners association. And it got in, somebody else saw it as an obstacle to view rather than a beautiful tree. And I just, I'm an activist. I thought I worked on saving the tree for almost a whole year and realized that short of tying myself to the tree and making myself a spectacle and bringing in some publicity, I could not save this tree. And so it was going to be cut down when I went to New York to the United Nations, and I was on a panel with Gloria Steinem, and I told her my sad story that when I come home, that tree's going to be cut down. And she said to me, "Jean, remember, you are a writer. You can have the last word." And that sustained something in me. And I came back and I studied trees. I studied biology. I didn't, pre-med, you don't study botany. Right. And as I got more and more into what trees do for us and everything like that, the book that came out was not an angry book. It was, it was like I was really, in many ways, transformed into appreciating what the trees do for us. So then a decade goes by and we're here, and it's sort of like, well, it seems as if sometimes you find yourself prepared to do something in the present that you prepared for and didn't realize. And that's the case with the book Like a Tree.
Yeah.
I'm struck by the conversation about the trees helping us breathe. And I'm also struck by the fact that this tiny virus attacked our breathing mechanism.
Mhm.
People that get sick can't breathe. And for me, liminal means breathing into the next space, creating somehow another space. So as we sit here and think about our breath, think about the trees, think about birthing, coming through a canal, taking your first breath, what does it mean to breathe into the future? How do we do that? Do artists do that when they sit and look at a blank canvas? They take a breath and dip into the paint and begin. How do you do that, Jean, when you sit down to write? And you, Nina, when you think about leadership for women and gather groups together and breathe into that space and make something new happen.
Just a thought how inspiration is when you take your breath into the tree. I mean, if you see an X-ray or you see what lungs do, they branch out like trees.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
The similarities are many.
They are. And, you know, I'm struck by how life-giving it is to me to connect with other species in this time. You know, I'm reading an amazing book called Undrowned that's a Black feminist lessons from marine mammals. And one of the things I just learned in it is that we could greatly reduce our carbon emissions if we could bring back some of the whales and dolphins that we have destroyed. So they are also breathing us. You know, the whole of Gaia is breathing us. And what I find, I'm super honored that we are being visited by Susan Weed somewhere on here, who is saying, look up, the buds are forming. You know, nature is remarkably resilient. And how do we cultivate our own resilience? Well, you know, look to the mother. She is such an extraordinary mentor and teacher. If only we can get out of our own way and get humble enough to really learn from her. And I'm having an amazing experience right now of, I was guided to begin a morning meditation and just in the last 5 or 6 weeks. And I'm amazed at how rapidly I can feel it changing me. And so sorry that it has taken this long in my life to discover this. But one of the things I was guided to do was to listen for another species ally. And I felt called to this bush that's called Apache plume. And if you look it up, it's a very strange looking bush that's endemic to where I live in New Mexico, but it's beautiful and very, very resilient. And so I find myself having this intimate relationship with this bushy plant that has the funniest kind of hair like Cyndi Lauper, and is one of the only plants in this high desert landscape that is actually proliferating in spite of the 10-year drought that we're in. So, you know, it chose me well. And I mean, that's one of the things, Rosemary, that I find I look to both for grounding and for resilience. I feel as though, you know, it's not only the pandemic that we're all navigating, but also this ecological collapse that's happening all over the planet, that whether we're conscious about it or not, involves a whole lot of loss and transition. There's the economic contraction, and then there's the wild polarization of that's both about racial justice and racial systems of racial injustice and economic disparity and health disparity And all those things together, I think are causing us to sort of rebirth ourselves, if you will. And I think part of the opportunity of liminal time and space, you know, I know a great many people who are revisiting childhood traumas, because this feels like a time when transformation is possible. And it's a time when so much of our attention can go inner, that we can, those things that have held us back, we can revisit so that we can, you know, open the lock and the gate of our own little prisons that exist because of those old traumas. So many opportunities in the liminal space, I feel, but not easy.
It's very interesting because the first conversation we had
Mm,
with Claudette Worley.
mm,
Claudette Worley is a Haitian woman
uh-huh.
that really experienced so much of the trauma that Haiti has gone through for many years,
Yeah,
including you know, all kinds of natural events,
yes.
political events, and unrest as well.
Yeah.
And what she brought up was the same thing that you just brought up,
Mm,
except in a different way. So that as people walk the earth there, they see a reminder of
mm,
trauma
mm,
and are reliving it.
mm.
Are they reliving it in a way that is productive, creative, and helpful? We don't know. But perhaps this is a time that is offering that opportunity, which is what I hear you saying.
Well, I think it is. I also think that we are all experiencing trauma in one way or another right now. I really believe that it's very widely available, just the anxiety of living through the pandemic and recognizing that all of our systems, you know, the systems that were built upon patriarchal structures have revealed all their fault lines and are falling apart and crumbling. And, you know, I don't have a lot of faith in our institutions. I mean, they barely held in the last month or two, but only barely. And actually, so that's another kind of anxiety, is like, I remember, Rosemary, when I realized that I couldn't count on the Food and Drug Administration to keep our food products safe. You know, when I started discovering all of the terrible stuff that was being put in our food supply, and that the FDA wasn't doing their job. And the truth is, all of our major institutions, I think, are having breakdowns so that the breakthrough of the new civilization can emerge. But that's a traumatic process to go through, you know? And I think as we all know, there is growth in the wounding, you know, if only we can turn towards it and not bury it or turn away from it.
Well, during this liminal time, one of the things that are happening for a lot of people is they're so used to being extrovertedly oriented,
Yes.
and to find themselves having to keep company with themselves
Mhm.
without getting an audience of people who work for them or whatever, you know,
Mhm.
everyone goes through a period of disorientation,
Mhm.
because usually you're oriented towards outer world in so many ways.
Yes.
And people that are naturally not introverted are then having to figure out whether they can tolerate just being by themselves for periods of time. Can they go inward? Will they
Mhm.
remember a dream?
Mhm.
Will they start remembering things that they suppressed?
Mhm.
Or will they take, go to turn to drugs or turn to something to numb them out?
Mhm.
That's what people are individually coming up against? Will
Yeah.
they confront, look inward when you can't look outward anymore like you used to? And claim the parts of yourselves that other people, when you were growing up, made you feel ashamed of. You see, one of the
Yes.
things that happens in the liminal space is you can actually spend time doing things that you want to do that nobody approved of, particularly, especially in the creative world. People would say, well, you can't make a living doing that, or women don't do that, or, and
Yeah.
hey, how about reinventing yourself truly in this liminal space by being willing to take baby steps into that world that always intrigued you? I'm seeing that happen to people, by the way, and I think that that's one of the things about
Yeah.
liminal time. I mean, when a woman is pregnant, she is herself in a liminal time because her
Mhm.
body changes shape. She
Mhm.
doesn't know who is going to come out of her. She doesn't know how she's going to, whether she's going to be much of a mother or not, especially if it's her first child. And it's a whole period of transition and commitment to a process that once you're in it, it's pretty hard to stop. And so we're all in that liminal place kind of now. And this time of liminality is like a long, well, it's been more than 9 months. So it's more like an elephant pregnancy than a human pregnancy. And what will we give birth to from inside out?
Yeah. Well, and I'm having this very humbling experience of facing a shadow part of myself that I'm noticing still identifies some of my self-worth by how well I'm serving the needs of others. And, I recently took a day off where I realized, oh my gosh, it's been too long since I took a day off. I felt so free and so liberated and so shocked to realize how starving I was for not being on call for other people's needs for a day. And now I'm going, okay, of course we teach what we most need to learn, duh. But so here I am going, okay, clearly I need some service to this instrument in order to bring my best self to this transforming world. And it's a reminder. It's also, it's another element of the rest busyness, right, imbalance that, it seemed to me that everyone I spoke to yesterday, and it was quite a number of people, in one way or another said, I'm exhausted. I'm so tired. I'm sleeping 9 or 10 hours and I'm still not getting enough. And I thought, okay, that's part of the liminal transformative space too. And Susan Weed is saying, drink your nourishing herbal infusions, which is so true, and I am. And, but, how do we nourish our bodies, our hearts, our spirits, and our intuition, and step back from the mental space that, is all about activity and busyness that we're all accustomed to. I mean, it's a very healthful rest and reformation period we're getting here, if we can see it that way.
Well, it also means that you have to go through this liminal time that you're not used to and stop busy, busy, busy.
Yeah.
Which means that you are with yourself, and it is a toleration of a period of feeling lonely.
Mm.
One of the reasons why people are so busy is that they don't know what to do when they are by themselves, and they begin to realize that they're lonely.
Mm.
And in that lonely period,
Yes.
the question was for,
Mm.
well, what might be growing in you that you can bring out?
Yeah.
That you can be absorbed in, because you're you're being yourself. You're not serving everybody else or doing what everybody else thinks you should be doing. You're
Yes.
actually sitting there and you're really wondering, um, okay, what is stirring?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you start getting in touch with something that is meaningful from inside out,
Mm.
and you start doing it, one of the ways of realizing that you're really living your own life deeply is you lose track of time.
Mhm.
You're so absorbed in whatever.
Yeah.
It may be walking in the woods. It may be that you are trying to do this artistic stuff that you actually always wanted to do, but other people ridicule you, or it's, it doesn't make money.
Yes.
And then you start it and you get into it
Yes.
and you lose track of time.
Yeah.
You have, but you have to go through that space of feeling like, what? What should I do with this time?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that intrigues me, I'm kind of a student of systems. And so I am deeply immersed in racial justice learning at the same time as, I'm exploring health and pandemics and everything else. But one of the things that I notice is that there was a racial justice educator who I heard recently who said one of the most important things that we can all cultivate in this time of racialized reckoning is discomfort resilience. And I thought, oh, how interesting, because we need uncertainty resilience too, and discomfort resilience. And isn't it part of the relic of a white supremacy culture that we tend to avoid discomfort, we tend to avoid uncertainty, and those are resiliences we can be cultivating in ourselves right now.
There's a lot of work going on, isn't there?
There is. But you know what I love about cultivating discomfort resilience is it actually reminds me that I'm stronger than I think. Sitting in discomfort is really a good exercise, just as sitting in uncertainty is, because it gives us an opportunity to kind of surrender to the greater whole, to recognize that we're not really in charge, which I think is part of the instruction we're going through in this period, is shifting from an I culture to a we culture, and learning that we're not in charge, nature's in charge, actually, right? And everything we do is a subset of that law and that context. And that's a very humbling experience, but one that I think we as a species are really being called towards right now. And it's not without its comforts, thankfully, but we have to turn towards them in order to be able to receive them.
I wonder, sometimes it seems like nature behaves in a sort of synchronistic way of providing certain deep lessons. Like being in California, we're aware that it is Silicon Valley and all those multi-billionaire people who recently are decided to move everything to Texas. Well, that ought to be a little humbling. I think that to be humbled is actually one of the major lessons that
Yes.
each individual can feel.
Mm.
The sense of humility, humbled and then humility. I mean, humbling is sort of taking the ego and confronting it, and you're not as big or great or rich or smart or whatever as you thought you were. So you could be humiliated and lots of people are, but humbled is very different. Humbled is when you appreciate,
Mhm.
yeah, you really
Yeah.
are just one person. And when you look around and you sense that, you have it a lot better than a lot of people.
Yeah.
I have been signing off on my newsletters with what I consider a mantra because I type it out every single time myself. Love, hope, perseverance, or
Mm.
stubbornness. Love, hope, perseverance. How come I'm forgetting what
Mhm. Mhm.
what is that last one? It's grace, and then gratitude is the last word.
Mhm.
I'll have to look up that.
I'll go look at one of your emails. and see.
Kathy says trust.
Yeah,
Is it trust?
yeah. I mean, it is
Mhm.
trust in the deeper sense for me is that what is unfolding, I have to trust
Mm.
as being part of the path. And you know, one of the metaphors for me has, for a long time, has been the labyrinth.
Mm.
And that is, you think you're doing just fine, and then oops, you turn.
Mhm.
And the Charter Labyrinth has something like 28 U-turns. And
Mm.
every major U-turn is like a liminal time.
Mm.
A liminal time when, you know, you're disoriented from what you thought was happening, but then oops, you're fired. Your relationship ends. You've got a diagnosis that says you could die from something,
Mm.
or you get bad news from something. Suddenly, the path you were on that just looked straight and, you know, right toward the center, it's like, oops, you turn.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in that U-turn, you can either collapse into it, as lots of people do, and give up,
Mhm.
or you learn humility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you learn to be grateful because a helping hand of some sort comes out in some way.
Mm.
And then you're back on a path again,
Mm.
deeper. And that could be happening to all huge numbers of people right now in this liminal time.
Mm.
All the things they thought really mattered, maybe it doesn't. Especially the outer extroverted kinds of world of things.
Yeah.
Sounds as though an enormous surrender
Well,
into what is, into accepting what's happening, and becoming much more aware of all the details inside and outside.
yeah. I think, you know, Rosemary, if we are living in a time when what we as women bring is what's needed to help restore balance in the world, not only in a gendered way, but in terms of the archetypal feminine and masculine, right? We're seeing the destruction from such gross imbalance of the masculine and the feminine in our cultures. And it's all over the world, actually, in many parts of the world. And if what the archetypal feminine has to bring is what's needed, when we look at, you know, the nations that are being led by women are the ones with the greatest COVID record. They're the ones with the greatest peacemaking record. They're the ones with the greatest ecological health. I mean, it's pretty remarkable across the boards how what we have intuited for so long is being proven, right, out in the world. So what I'm excited about in this liminal time is, you know, I refer back to what I've learned from the great physicist David Bohm. And David Bohm was a very renowned physicist who actually studied with all these spiritual leaders because he wanted to understand the intersection of spirituality and science. And what he came to actually was that the world is comprised of two complementary parts. And he called them the implicate order and the explicate order. And what he said is that, you know, the explicate order is everything that we can perceive with our five senses. And the implicate order is everything else. And because of the biases that we were all raised with, we might assume that the explicate order is the larger of the two. But the metaphor that he used that I love so well, and I know you know this, Jean, is he said it's like the explicate order, what we can perceive with our senses, is like the froth on the waves of the ocean. And the implicate order, which is everything else, is the ocean itself. And so for me, the opportunity of this liminal time and space is to immerse myself and cultivate my capacity to dance with the implicate order, to perceive, you know, the messages that come from my ancestors, to awaken to the value of dream time, to go into deep meditation and listen deeply for the instructions that come from the invisible world, from Gaia, from all of our ways of knowing that are not connected to our senses. And for me, that's part of the gift of re-immersing myself in the feminine, in the inner world, is we get as humans this opportunity to cultivate our capacity to interface with the implicate order, with the invisible worlds. And what a gift that is for all of our human potential. And imagine who we might be when we come out the other side. It's pretty exciting. I sure want that for myself anyway. And I'm loving it. I'm loving having these vivid visitations in my dream time, you know, and a very different experience of going within than I've ever had before. But it's more than surrendering, I think, Rosemary. I think it's turning towards, you know, there is an element of surrender for sure, but there's also a choosing to turn towards that inner world, which we don't have. Yeah.
Letting go of the idea of control.
Yes. Yes. Rather a large one for us.
Right, it truly, truly is. But
Yeah.
it's an opportunity for collectively, for the species called human beings. You know, and maybe we will get to be Homo sapiens sapiens after all, sapiens meaning wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we will become who we were meant to be. I mean, that's a whole idea about spiritual psychological development, is to become who you were meant to be.
Yes.
Well, what about the species?
Yeah. Well, and to do that, I think we have to shift our inherited bias from being focused on the future only and learn from our ancestors and our indigenous allies, you know, and from tradition from the past, that there are many really valuable lessons about how to live in right relationship to the natural world that come from our elders. They come from the trees, as you know, Jean. They come from the whales. They come from the elephants, and they come from our ancestors and our indigenous relatives. And so I think we need to span past and future in order to really inhabit this liminal space.
I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but I am going to share this little story. You were talking before about your connection to nature and our connection to nature. And I remember reading this very dense book one day, and I knew the answer to what I was looking for was in it, but I hadn't found it yet. And there's a fly on the next page, on the page opposite from what I'm reading. And I flick it off and it comes right back to the same spot. And I flick it off and it comes back right to the same spot. And when I finally get around to that spot where the fly was, that is the piece of information that I have been looking for.
Synchronicity.
There you go.
I've never
Exactly.
any of these connections, but I am willing to let them all in. And I think that's really where we are now, is letting it all in, whether we're alone, whether we're with each other on a Zoom call, or dreaming and letting some, and welcoming Andy back.
Yes.
Jean has a book that has just been republished. She spoke of it, Like a Tree. And it was republished on Andy's birthday, which is clearly a
Wow.
connection.
It was a synchronicity. It was the
Wow.
So anyway, the whole sort of spiritual connections, the experience of Tara Tempest Williams, who wrote just a beautiful foreword to it. She went out. She had never met Andy. She talked to me shortly after Andy had died, and she had never met him. And we talked, and then she went out to Moab, where her house is, or outside of Moab. And there's something that is apparently like an altar, a natural rock altar. And she went out and sort of said, I just talked to your mom, as if Andy might hear. And then she heard Andy speak back to her. and it had to do with her fear that a lump that she had in her body could be malignant, like so many people in her family, because they had tested the Utah testing grounds for the nuclear bomb had done its damage.
Yes.
And so Andy said to her, time is immaterial. You have as much time as you need. And that was a profound piece of wisdom. You have as much time as you need. So she immediately went to made an appointment with the oncologist, because she was really going to face it. And she turns out to be fine. She's had all this time since. And it has been, and Andy has showed up for a number of people. In fact, maybe I should say, hey, listen, if you need to talk to somebody on the other side, consider saying, we just heard from your mom. Could you help us with this, Andy? And it just may work. It actually just may work.
And we can certainly live with his words that we have all the time we need.
Yes.
Yes. And I am fond of remembering, in this moment of so many passing to the other side, that there is a team assembling there to help. And, that's another source we can call upon. I mean, I think there are great allies everywhere, but we have to know how to ask for them,
right,
and ask for their help.
I have recently written a piece which I call My Crowd in the Cloud. And I think we all now have crowds.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you, Jean, we've come to the end of our hour, which I think we could go for 3 or 4 more hours, but you ring your bell or your chime or your bowl, your Tibetan bowl, and ring us out.
And then everybody, as you feel the vibration, feel it in your heart, and maybe there will be a particular message that comes to you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Nina. Thank all of you who have joined us today. Blessings on your day and on your use of liminal space.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you. Thank you for this beautiful conversation.
Been wonderful. Thank you, Amy, for technologically making all of this happen, and Grace for your part in it. Let's close the hour. Everyone have a wonderful day.